So good day, friends. This is Dr. Bob Hamilton, and you have tuned in today to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. And I thank you very much for making us part of your day. It means a lot to me, and I appreciate that. I know everybody, if you're like me and my wife and my kids and everybody I know, we live busy lives. So the fact that you're tuning in today, I hopefully will be useful information, and I certainly appreciate that. If you like what you hear, tell a friend, pass it on. We're trying to build an audience, and frankly, the people I bring on this show are people worthy of being heard and shared. So thank you today. And today is virtually no exception. We have a wonderful guest. His name is David Thomas. He wears a lot of hats. First of all, he's a husband. Second of all, he's a father of three children. He is also an author. We're going to talk about some of the books he has written today. He's actually a pretty prolific author. He is a therapist, and he is the head of an organization, a counseling group called Daystar Counseling, which is located in Nashville, Tennessee. You're in Nashville, right, David?
That is correct. Though I'm a little jealous of your sunshine and kind of wishing I was in California right now. It's rainy and cold here in Nashville.
Well, we have another beautiful sunny day. But before we get to the weather, I want to at least introduce you. So, David Thomas, thank you for being part of the Hamilton Review.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be with you today.
Thank you. So, David, I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to my podcast or not, but I like to introduce my listeners to you through your own words. So I'd like if you would kind of back up in your life and share a little bit about your background, where you're from. What was the passion that drove you to become a family counselor, and why are you writing the books you're writing? Just give us a little background of who David Thomas is.
I'd be glad to. I grew up in a small town. I've lived in Tennessee, born and raised my entire life. And I have one sister, grew up with some pretty remarkable parents who I am beyond thankful put their handprint on my life. And I actually had two friends in high school who said to me at one point many, many years ago, like, do you think you kind of always knew you were going to do this work? Because you were kind of always the friend we would go to talk through things we were struggling with. And I do vividly remember that through my journey of growing up as a young man, of that just felt natural to me. And then interestingly enough, when I went away to college, the summers of my college, my undergrad years, I worked at a camp for elementary age kids. And my colleagues would come and get me with the kids who were really homesick and couldn't stop crying, or the kids who had a hard time falling asleep at night because they were really missing their parents. And where that overwhelmed them, it didn't overwhelm me. I was really comfortable just sitting with kids in those hard moments. I can remember having long conversations with kids whose parents had recently separated or divorced. And so in that regard, I do think maybe I always knew that I was going to do this work, though I took some detours, as many college students do, and tried out some different majors along the way, but fell in love with the study of human behavior. And so I have an undergrad degree in child psychology and minored in child development, and then went on to grad school to do my graduate work, and have loved doing this work with kids and families for over 25 years now. I've been a part of the practice at Daystar. And we are unique in that we serve just the pediatric population, and we're actually in a house rather than an office, which was a very intentional decision for us. And I actually have 5 colleagues on staff who are canines. We have 5 therapy dogs on staff at our practice, which was a very intentional decision, and hands down are the kids' favorite therapists. All of those of us who are humans, we're very aware we're low in the pecking order, and we're all okay with that. But those
are these puppy dogs? They're not going on strike, are they? You're feeding them well, you're housing them well. They're not bartering for higher wages.
They are not. In fact, they know they've got a great gig. Like every 50 minutes, somebody else comes in the office who's excited to see them and wants to pet them. They get to sit in air conditioning all day. It's a great gig for a therapy dog.
You know what? That may be, that's a great idea, honestly. I worked in an office one time where we had birds. We had a big bird cage, in the front waiting room, and the birds were always a little skittish, I have to say, around the patients. They would come to the window and look at the birds. The birds would always fly away, but maybe puppy dogs, um, although you'd have to get non-allergic dogs because of all these allergies we have. But that's a brilliant idea, David. Well, you have 5 of them. Wow. Okay.
5 of them. And it fascinates me how many kids have come through the front door of our house, anywhere from fearful and hesitant about the experience to sometimes with adolescents just full on resistant and mad about it, and how those dogs do so much softening with those kids and adolescents on the front side to really open them up. So they earn their keep. They work hard. That's very
cute. I love that. So you're back at Daystar. You have written a lot of books, David. You've written about how to raise emotionally healthy boys and girls, and just about family. The subtitle of my show is "Where Kids and Culture Collide," and so I am particularly interested in, obviously, in families, because families, I think, in America today are changing. They're definitely becoming, I have to say, in my experience, my observation here, my practice, is they're becoming more fragmented. They're more confused. They're I think, chaotic in some ways. I'd like to have you've been in this business for 25 years. Can you kind of look at the entity of the family and kind of trace maybe the last 25 years in your experience back there in Tennessee? What's going on with the family in America?
Yeah, I would first just agree with you. I see families more fragmented than ever, less connected. And we have long known, and I think research will always support the benefits of kids having a strong connection with both parents. And I think it's happening less and less in this day and age, and impacts their growth on so many levels: their emotional growth, their relational growth, their spiritual growth. Like every layer of their development, I think, is impacted by that. And so the work I've done, if I were to think about all of what I've done in writing and teaching and counseling, is so much about, I think it's where you and I are so aligned, of really strengthening families. And so it's where I'm beyond grateful for your podcast, of really looking at that intersection and trying to identify what are the things that are getting in the way of families being more connected? What are the things that are making them more fragmented? So it's a part of where, I had done this work for over a decade and started doing some teaching at some local schools and in our community, and found that, one, I really loved it. Two, it felt proactive. So much of the work I do as a therapist feels reactive. And so I loved the idea of teaching, which gave way to writing, to thinking about, how could I, in some ways, I've laughed over this over the years, how could I, in some ways, kind of work myself out of a job? How could I create some resources for families so that I might be less needed over the course of the journey, or things that families could be doing on the front side of a kid's development to really equip and strengthen them. My last book in particular, I think a lot about that famous Frederick Douglass quote of, "It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." And I believe that to be 100% true. And so, this last book of how do we build emotional strength in kids so that I don't have to sit front row, as I've had to do for so many decades now, to see the destruction that a lot of adults, and I would argue men in particular, can bring to a marriage and family relationship. We as men lead the stats for infidelity, internet pornography, substance abuse, suicide. And I have had a chance to sit front row to those realities time and time again, and the ripple effect of that on a family. Those things. It happened just yesterday in my office, a dad who's addicted, and all of what that means for his wife, for his children. And so I just want to do everything I know to do on my watch, in my work, to really strengthen families on the front side of development is my great hope.
The family, listen, when you think about culture, and I think about this a lot because I'm now moving a little bit along in my life, and I'm looking back and remembering, but the family, in my opinion, is the basic unit of the culture, the basic unit of the community. If you have fragmented families, you really do get dysfunction in a broad array. You see it, obviously, you see it in schools. The kids are having issues with, inattention or whatever, ADHD, all these different phenomena that happen. Kids are not interested in learning. They just kind of tune out education. But that's the beginning of it. You see it in all sorts of ways as the kids age and grow up. And so the family is something which is, I think, really, really, really important. And I beg, there are a few things, David, that I do. A lot of people make a lot of decisions regarding their kids, whether they put them, in homeschool, or they send them to camp, or they do this, or whatever they do, travel with them, teach, have them go to take music lessons. These are all things which I look at that as being, I don't have a feeling about them. But one thing I do beg, I literally beg my families who are getting divorced. I look at them, I like to bring them into a room, and I look at the father and the mother, and I say, listen, something brought you together 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever that thing was. And I use the word beg. I go, I beg you to rethink this divorce, rethink this separation, because between the two of you, okay, you're living your lives. I'm thinking about the children who are behind you, and the horrible effect that's going to have on them. And sometimes I'm able to make the case, and some people actually change their mind. It's rare, but it does happen at times. But I completely agree with you, David, that the family is paramount to the health of children, certainly, and ultimately to the community, and ultimately to our nation as a whole.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm grateful you're having those kind of conversations in your office. I'm having them in mine as well.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting to me early in my work, and I have a suspicion that you've had the exact same experience. I could have counted on one hand the number of families I was working with who were in the process of separation and divorce in the first 5 years of their child's life. It was mostly happening years down the road. Now I couldn't begin to count the number of families who are separating and divorcing that I consult with, who are within those first 5 years, those early years when kids need so much structure, so much consistency, so much sameness. And for the two most foundational people in your life to decide to separate and live in different homes, and you've got to go back and forth when you're 3 and 4 years old, like the impact of that, not that it's not impactful in all moments of development, but in particular, it's a part of why, I say to parents, think about our preschool environments. Where else in the world would a human being go where you hang your backpack in the exact same cubby, you sit in the same desk, we wash our hands at 9:55, we have a snack at 10 o'clock, we have circle time at 10:20.
Okay, David, I want to change the topic a little bit. I want to get into some of the books that you've written, and one of the ones is How to Raise an Emotionally Strong Boy. So, can you just give us a couple of pearls here that we can think about in terms of our boys?
I'd love to. I was excited to write this book, and it's been funny to get feedback along the way. I was talking with a mom just recently. I wrote a companion workbook for boys to go along with this book called Strong and Smart. And the mom said, I'm reading Raising Emotionally Strong Boys. I bought the workbook Strong and Smart for my son, but I'm honestly using a lot of it with my 37-year-old husband. And I laughed with her and said, and that's allowed. I didn't have your 37-year-old husband in mind when I wrote the book, but whoever benefits from this, I'm on board with that. And it's been great.
David, can I interject one thing? I think the guys, sorry guys, if you're listening, I think guys get to be about 15, 16, 17, and then they don't change. I mean, the way I think today, I hate to say it, is that I kind of think the way I thought when I was a teenager. I'm kind of still immature in so many ways. So your book is applicable. Probably I could read your book and glean a lot of information there too.
Well, I'm hopeful it's helpful for a lot of dads. And I do love hearing families talk about doing the work alongside their kids. That's probably the best feedback I've gotten since I released the book, that they're not just requiring their kids to develop these skills and practice these strategies, they're doing it with them, which is just ideal when kids can get to sit front row and watch the grownups they trust the most in this world doing this work. And one of the most foundational parts of this book for me was I introduced what I call the 3 R's, which is something I've been doing in my office for 25 years, teaching kids. And the first R is recognize. And I teach it to kids kind of like the dashboard of a car. I say, our bodies are kind of like the car. And you know how the dashboard of your parents' car will signal it, like when the tire is low or the tank is empty, or maybe you get a check engine light. And we all know that if we attend to those signs and signals, then the car keeps running efficiently. But if we ignore those things, I'm going to end up on the side of the road with a flat tire, empty tank, whatever it may be. And our bodies do the same. It will signal a response when emotions move into the body. That's kind of the first R of recognize. And then the second R is regulate. And it's to employ calming and coping strategies when the nervous system goes into a heightened state of arousal. So it's the simple or Cliff Notes version is kind of moving myself from chaos to calm or stress to settled. And then the third R is repair. And it is taking ownership and doing any needed relational work. And I think those three R's are foundational ingredients in building emotional strength into kids. And with that third R of repair, I talk a lot about how in my work, I have over the years seen so many boys and adolescent males, and quite honestly, a lot of adult men who swing between blame and shame. In fact, research would say in the face of failure, boys will more oftentimes blame someone else and girls more oftentimes blame themselves. And I see evidence of that even with adult women. I sit with moms all the time who their kids are struggling, and they will ask me this question, David, what am I doing wrong? They're blaming themselves when they see their kids struggle. And I see a lot of adult men blaming others. I sat with a couple yesterday, and the mom blamed herself and the dad blamed the mom for where their kids were struggling. They were such a picture of this swing. And so I talk about how
they were in agreement there, right? The mother blamed herself, the father. Okay, there we go. The guy gets out of it completely.
Yes. Okay. And I talk about how blame is just discharge pain and how shame is just self-contempt, and neither are helpful. If boys just swing between those places of blaming other people or then moving toward a shame spiral, like I have this happen all the time. I hear parents report boys move towards saying things like, I'm the worst person in this family. Nobody likes me. I should have never been born. That's just self-contempt. And again, that swing between blame and shame is not healthy for any of us. So that healthy middle ground of taking ownership when I've messed up, which we all do, that's a normal human experience. And then figuring out how to do any needed relational work. If I got dysregulated and yelled at my parents, I need to take ownership for that and make it right. So teaching and practicing those three R's are really the heart of this new book. And again, as simple as that sounds, I know a lot of adults in this world who haven't developed those. In fact, not long ago, I travel a lot with speaking with my work. I was in the airport. You may remember this day. It made the news. It was a day several months ago in 2022 when we set a record in our country for the most canceled flights on one day. I was actually driving to the airport, headed to Orlando to speak, and I got a notification that I'd had a delay. And then as I was walking into the airport, a second notification of delay. As I was moving through security, I got my first cancellation notice. And as I was walking through the airport to my gate to try to rebook a flight, it was like something out of an apocalyptic movie, like cancel, cancel, cancel. The boards were just lighting up, and you could feel the temperature rising in the airport as people were trying to figure out, what am I going to do? Do I get a rental car? Can I get another flight? All these things. And over the course of the next couple of hours, as I was in the airport, I watched 3 adult men, professional men dressed in suits, get handcuffed by airport security and hauled away for getting volatile with a gate agent. And I thought to myself, this is such a picture of why I wrote this book. There's so many adults in this world who the discomfort of a canceled flight is what would lead you to a place of getting arrested. Like you didn't have any more skills or strategies in place to calm yourself in that moment and to move back toward rational thinking. And that's obviously a pretty extreme example, but sadly, there are thousands of examples like that every day in this world of adults who haven't learned to pay attention to the signs and signals their body is giving and to do the work of regulation.
You know, regulation is, I think, the center of these 3 R's. And I'm thinking about the idea that, you know, before listen, I have said things rationally, certainly into my wife and other people. And I look back and I kind of go, why didn't I take a deep breath or take a second? How do you do you have any tips on regulation? Because I think obviously the repair, you have to kind of go, oh, I screwed that up and I really need to go back and ask for forgiveness. And I've done that plenty of times in my life. But the regulation, that seems to be that moment where you just impulsively blurt out something. Any thoughts about that?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, it's why I teach the first R of recognize first, because the hope would be we could head that off. Like I could notice that my shoulders are getting tight, that my neck is getting red, that my heart rate is increasing, so that I could start to do the work of regulation on the front side before I, on that 1 to 10 scale, get to 10. But wherever I am on that scale, I love what you said just a moment ago. Breathing is one of the most effective strategies. The research would tell us at least 20 seconds of deep breathing will begin to reset the amygdala. If I double that to 40 seconds or triple it to 60, just 1 minute of deep breathing, I can do some amazing work. In fact, I wear the Apple Watch, and in my office, when I teach deep breathing to kids, I will say, okay, look at my heart rate right here. Do you think it's going to go up or go down as you and I do this breathing together? And kids always know. They're like, it's going to go down. Absolutely. And it's so fun for them to get to watch that we're hardwired in a way that we can begin to create that settling effect with something as simple as breathing. Now, the second thing I'd recommend to your great question is movement. And I talk a lot about how for us as boys, as males, we have a lot of physicality to our emotions. So it's why research would tell us that, preschool age boys are more prone in a classroom to biting, hitting, kicking, screaming, shoving, throwing. Adolescent boys a little more prone to punching a hole in drywall. It's that need for a release. So how do we create some healthy outlets for that release? I talk a lot in the book about healthy outward movement. And so how do we create some of those strategies through things like breathing and movement so that I've got those in place, so that I practice them consistently, so that when I need them in these heightened moments, they're familiar to me. And that's the long game.
So what kind of movement are you talking about? Are you talking about walking around or jumping up? I mean, what kind of movement are you talking about?
Absolutely. In fact, I remember being in elementary school playing on a basketball team. The first time I ever heard a coach say the phrase walk it off. And he would instruct us when you are amped up and the only thing you might be thinking to do would be to shove an opponent or to yell at the referee because you didn't like the call. What would it look like to walk up and down the side of the court in that moment? What would it look like to pace around while the ref is making a call? That walk it off phenomena. And that is simply that reminder that when we move our bodies in some way, we're going to create some of this reset process. And so I love to brainstorm with kids, and it fascinates me what they'll come up with. I had a kid in my office yesterday who was like, throwing the tennis ball in the backyard helps me reset. Riding my bike, jumping on the trampoline, shooting hoops. I have a kid who's throwing a tennis ball up against the side of the brick house. And that release, again, that movement release is a part of what's helping that reset process. Yeah. And so in the book, I coach kids and families through coming up with what I call a top 5 list. And hang that up somewhere in your house, or with adolescents, I'll have them put it on their phone. How could you have that top 5 list on the ready so that when you're thinking brain goes offline and you can't even remember the good ideas you've come up with in a calmer moment, you could access this list, this reminder to move myself from that heightened state, from chaos to calm, from stress to settle.
Well, I mean, there's a great biblical quote that says, a gentle answer turns away wrath. And yes. I think that, our tendency is when you see anger, you react with anger. If someone comes at you and is angry at you for whatever reason, a gentle answer will actually kind of flip it on his head. It's hard to do that. One thing that I also do, David, recommend that all the kids play musical instruments. I do find that I play a violin, the viola. I do find that sometimes when I get really upset about something, I go play a couple bars on my viola, and I'm suddenly taken into a different place, and I can calm my spirit down a little bit, rather than reacting in a very negative way. That's very good.
I love that.
So you also wrote a book about raising emotionally strong girls, and I'm curious, boys and girls, they're different creatures, aren't they?
They are very different creatures, and you are kind to say that. I actually co-authored a book a couple of years ago called Are My Kids on Track, where we did talk a lot about the emotional development of girls in that with some of my colleagues. In fact, we track 4 emotional, 4 social, and 4 spiritual milestones that we want to see kids moving toward throughout development. And in that, we highlight, to your great question, that significant difference between boys and girls. And, one of the things that we say, and I mention again in this newest book, and this well because it's your work, that, at those early well visits with great folks like you, when you're asking that question to parents, like, how many words is he or she saying? What the research would tell us is that, around 18 months, boys are saying about 30 words on average. Girls are saying about 100. And so if on the front side of development, her general vocabulary is more expansive, it's understandable that her emotional vocabulary would be broader as well. And so we are going to have to labor a little longer with boys to develop an expansive emotional vocabulary. But just because girls have the words doesn't mean they necessarily know what to do with them. And I would say one of the bigger challenges we're seeing in our culture, girls and boys, is that kids don't have an accurate emotional vocabulary, and they grab hold of these big words and phrases to define their experience. So in my office, I rarely hear kids say, I feel sad anymore. They go straight to, I feel depressed. And now some kids are meeting the criteria for how you and I understand true depression. Many are not. It's just this big phrase. When I was growing up, if you were really frustrated with your parents and wanted them to know it, kids of my generation would say, I'm so mad, I'm going to run away from home. Sadly, in this day and age, that's not what kids say anymore. Kids now say, I'm so mad, I'm going to kill myself. I should just die. Like the scariest, worst thing any of us could say. And again, grabbing hold of these big words, these big declarations. I'll tell you kind of a funny example of that with girls. I was touring a little 6-year-old girl around our office. When kids come for their very first appointment for an assessment, we take them on a tour, let them meet some of the dogs, get them a snack. And then we sit down in our office, and I said to this little 6-year-old girl, I said, now tell me some of why you're here today. What did you and your mom and dad talk about before you came? And she said, well, Mr. David, I have a lot of toxic relationships. 6 years old. And I almost cracked up because it was so hilarious, but I was also so sad. I thought, you shouldn't even know the word toxic at 6 years old. And I'm sure you don't know what it means, but you've heard a lot of adults in your world likely saying that word. And it sounds like a big word to define what you and I know is probably the normal conflict kids have in relationship, that she's defined in this extravagant way because I think kids don't know how to say in normal ways. I feel frustrated because my friends left me out. I feel sad for whatever it may be. And so I believe strongly in helping kids, boys and girls, develop a solid emotional vocabulary on the front side of development, so they're not grabbing these big, huge words to describe their experience over the course of growing up.
Yeah, that is a pretty, I get a couple of those words too, and I look and kind of go, who's talking to you? Where are you getting this information? Where are you getting this diagnosis that you have? They come in and say, I have ADHD. I go, really? How do you know that? Show me how, in what way are you manifesting that? Interesting. Well, listen, David, I'm just looking at our time here. I want to make sure that I am honest with you in terms of your time back there in Tennessee. I would like to have, can you just, as we finish up here, first of all, I'd like to give you the opportunity to share, how do people find you? By the way, I want to say one thing. I feel like I've just had a counseling session that I kind of needed today in the middle of this holiday period. I'm feeling like, hey, you know what? I need a little bit of this information. So thank you for the counseling session. I appreciate it. I needed it. I know you work with kids, but I think I fall, as a pediatrician, I fall into that broad rubric, that broad category of being a kid still. But how do people find you?
Well, first, I want to say to your kind words, I feel like I've had a well visit with my doctor today. Like, you have such a calming presence. You do. It makes me so grateful you're doing the work you're doing. And I can imagine what it's like for kids and adolescents and parents to intersect with you and come up against that calming presence. So thank you. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of our conversation. And if folks were interested in finding my work, the easiest place to do that would be go to our website, raisingboysandgirls.com. All one word, raisingboysandgirls.com. And it will take you to our podcast. We're on our 5th season of our podcast, trying to push out as much helpful information to parents as possible. It will link you straight to all the books that we've written that have come out of our practice. It will let you know if we're traveling to your city or state to teach any of the content we love to talk with parents and educators around. It will also take you to our social media account. We try to be pretty active on Instagram and create some short videos to just encourage and challenge parents in some different places, so they could hop on for a short 2 to 3 minute video where we might say, okay, in the last hour in my office, this topic came up, and I know this affects a lot of parents. So here's a couple of things to consider. So all of that comprehensively, just our effort to try to support and encourage parents in what I think is one of the hardest jobs on the planet. I really do. I think it's an unbelievably difficult job, and one that we want to really, like you, support parents in doing.
Beautiful. So the name again, friends, is Raising Boys and Girls. Go there. You'll find David Thomas and his incredible work. David, you have a wonderful, calming way about you as well. So I want to applaud your work, your efforts, and what you're doing. Over 25 years, you have definitely made a difference, obviously, in the lives of many, many people. So thank you. God bless you for what you do. So friends, you have been listening today to the Hamilton Review. We have had a great conversation with David Thomas. Look him up. He's a great guy. And until next time, be well. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of your day. Tune in again next week on Apple Podcast. Rate and comment and tell a friend.